Edinburgh, with its quiet grandeur, frames my questions about voice, expression, and meaning. As a singer, researcher, and voice pedagogue, I seek to understand how sound may move and, at times, transcend. This film follows that search through Baroque ornamentation and its emotional force. In Baroque practice, ornamentation was never mere decoration. It functioned as a rhetorical, meaning-bearing language shaped by style and doctrine. Yet perception varies. What one ear hears as ethereal, another may perceive as an excess, conditioned by expectation, exposure, and context. The discussion of Baroque vocal ornamentation has expanded significantly since the rise of historically informed performance, HIP, or HIP. Early historically informed performance pioneers such as Harnoncourt, Parrott, and Haynes demonstrated through scholarship and recordings that ornamentation is not mere embellishment, but a decisive, expressive device that shapes dramatic meaning. Their work revived engagement with primary treatises, including Caccini's Le Nuove Musiche, Tossi's Opinioni dei Cantori Antichi e Moderni, and Quanz's Versuch, each emphasizing improvisation, rhetorical delivery, and affective intent. Musicological surveys by Neumann and Haynes mapped conventions of trills, appoggiaturas, and passaggi across repertoires, confirming that melismatic passages amplified poetic imagery as well as virtuosity. However, these catalogues rarely address how 21st century performers can translate ornamentation into emotionally authentic experiences for contemporary audiences. Pedagogical literature stresses the technical foundations of expressive clarity. Stark and Miller highlight declamation, vowel strategy, and chiaroscuro balance, while Bozeman underscores the physiological agility required for coloratura. Yet few of these sources explain how singers may consistently achieve the ethereal quality often described by listeners. Empirical research adds further perspectives. Juslin and Sloboda argue that affective responses emerge from micro-variations in timing and dynamics, while Clark emphasizes ecological factors such as expectation and familiarity. Still, little data exist on how training or cultural background influences the reception of ornamented lines in early areas. In sum, scholarship has documented stylistic rules, physiological mechanisms, and perceptual conditions, but an integrated framework that unites pedagogy, performer intention, and listener reception remains elusive. This project therefore addresses a gap by combining practice-led exploration, interviews, and listening tests, aiming to both illuminate the expressive power of ornamentation and propose a model that makes it accessible for modern singers and audiences. Research questions. 1. Can the teaching and performance of Baroque ornamentation be systematized to make its emotional power more accessible to modern audiences? 2. To what extent is the appreciation of ethereal ornamentation dependent on a listener's auditory sensitivity or musical background? Maybe also cultural background. 3. How do singers and vocal coaches perceive and describe the aesthetic impact of melisma and color in early areas? 4. What pedagogical approaches can best develop a singer's ability to convey emotion through Baroque vocal ornamentation? Methodology. This study adopts a qualitative, practice-based methodology combining the following strands. 1. Semi-structured interviews. Professional singers, vocal coaches, students, and instrumentalists are interviewed to explore technical, emotional, and pedagogical aspects of ornamentation. 2. Listening test. Participants from both trained and general audiences listen to curated excerpts and complete questionnaires. A circumplex model of emotions is employed to help them articulate affective states. Responses are collected both in written form and through Likert scales measuring ethereality, beauty, and emotional power. 3. Interpretative phenomenological analysis, IPA. The qualitative data from interviews and listening tests are thematically analyzed to identify recurring perceptions of ornamentation, triangulating perspectives from pedagogy, performance, and audience reception. Together, these approaches allow the project to investigate ornamentation across historical, performative, and perceptual dimensions, while grounding analysis in lived experience. Pedagogy is dialogue. To understand ornamentation's power, I gathered perspectives from musicians, educators, and audiences. Such triangulation addresses the gap between style, technique, and perception noted in scholarship. Vocal coaches often emphasize chiaroscuro, the balance of brightness and depth, as key to expressive color. This illustrates how emotion is transmitted through technique, but depends equally on listener sensitivity. Instrumentalists, too, embody ornamentation principles. Whether in trill or cadence, the aim remains expressive persuasion rather than display. Ornamentation, therefore, is a shared language of affect, not limited to voice. Across instruments, the challenge persists to move the listener. This confirms that ornamentation is not an isolated skill, but a universal communicative art, echoing historically informed performance emphasis on rhetorical performance. To deepen this inquiry, it is vital to hear directly from one of today's leading exponents of Baroque singing. It is my absolute honor to welcome to this documentary one of the most celebrated countertenors of our time. Renowned for his breathtaking artistry, Iestyn Davies brings a unique combination of vocal brilliance, emotional depth, and authenticity. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with him about the ethereal power of ornamentation and the expressive depth of Baroque vocal music. Mr. Davies, thank you so much for joining me. I would like to start by asking, what first drew you personally to the world of Baroque music? And what is it about this repertoire that continues to inspire you today?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer what first drew me to the music because actually I had no choice because singing countertenor you have to sing 18th century music. That's the majority of what you sing. However, before I was a countertenor, when I was a young boy, I sang in a choir in Cambridge University. We didn't do a lot of Baroque 18th century music. We did a lot of 16th and 17th century early music, Palestrina, Gibbons, and so on, William Byrd, Tallis. And we sang a lot of 20th century and 19th century music. But I did used to listen to, I think, the Bach Brandenburg concertos. My dad used to play them on the car radio when we were on holiday. And I don't know that that was his idea of educating me, but he would listen to, I think it was Musica Antica Cologne's recording with Reinhard Goebel, and we had them on repeat in the car. So I really got into my head the sound world and the form of Baroque music from an early age. So inevitably, when I came to sing countertenor, and I sang a lot of Handel, for example, and Bach, it's something that I was drawn to because it was almost inside me from a young age. I think the reason that I'm now drawn to it so much is that it appeals to me in the same way that I think it appeals to an audience member, a non-performer, in that the music of the 18th century, that certainly the first half of the 18th century, let's say the kind of time of Handel and Bach, it's a period at which the form of the music and the style of the music, naturally, there's a cross section between that and what I like to think of as the most natural expression of an art form. And a good way of comparing that is illustrating that is to compare it to classical architecture. And for me, if you look at a Greek or Roman temple or a Georgian house, you said you're in Edinburgh right now. You look at these Georgian houses. There's something very of nature about the structure and the form and the balance and the ratio of classical dimensions that speaks to humans on a very balanced, natural level, almost as if it was part of the natural world. And I feel that that's similar with the music of this period, in that there's a very predictable, formulaic structure to it. When that's not to diminish it and make it sound naive and simple, but it's actually, or to say it's restricting, but it's actually very, very pleasing to be an observer, a listener, and to be a performer, because we know where this is going. We have the safety net underneath us of knowing the world in which we're in. And you don't have to know the piece to feel like you understand it. And even if you don't necessarily understand it to the level where you can explain what's happening harmonically or rhythmically, if you're just anybody listening to Vivaldi on the radio, for example, has a strong sense that they can enjoy this music without much understanding and interpretation themselves. And I think that's what really is appealing about Baroque music for me, is that there's that level which is part of nature, it's part of a sequence, it's part of a natural order at this time in history. And then within that, we have the great composers such as Handel and Bach, who challenge our expectations, our natural expectation to know the music is going in this direction. They do something with harmony or with rhythm that slightly surprises you. And for me, that's where it leads on to your subject of ornamentation, is that ornamentation in itself is leading you to or leading the listener to somewhere they don't expect, but yet at the same time feels familiar.
When asked what advice he would give to young singers, this is what Mr. Davies said.
I mean, my own experience is that I would begin by firstly mastering the aria without any ornamentation, and then listening to as many versions of that aria as possible. And we have that ability now with Spotify and iTunes stuff to just find 10, 11 versions of different singers and listen and work out, firstly, are there common similarities between the way they ornament? You might suddenly think, especially with pieces like Messiah, you will always end up singing the ornaments that somebody else has sung because they're just passed. It's a very oral tradition. People kind of pass on and the ornaments that work, people will copy and imitate. And then at some point you might write your own. But copy, imitate, see what it feels like, but then get into the habit of writing them down, perhaps even writing them out on a separate piece of paper, so that you don't just write them above the printed paper, because you start to then see the structure or the type of ornament you're doing. So, for example, I think of things like the aria Vivi Tiranno from the end of Rodlinda, which my character Bertorido sings. I grew up listening to that probably in two different recordings. One was by Andreas Scholl and one by David Daniels. And the two of them sing it very differently in terms of ornamentation. And that's to do with the ranges of their voice. And David at the time when he was recording was probably much more like a mezzo, higher than Andreas. And so Andreas is ornamenting within the comfort of his own voice, and David is singing with the comfort of his voice. But they both have something that works ornamentation wise. So familiarize yourself with not just what they're doing, but also who they are. Then also look at the time that was recorded. If you listen to recordings from the 1950s, ornaments are going to be very, very probably sparse, won't be many, and they will be of their time. And likewise, listen to recordings and notice who the conductor is. If you listen to a recording by say René Jacobs, you will notice not just in the singers but in the instruments, in the recitative, there's a lot of addition. He writes in a lot of extra stuff, and whether you like it or not, it's neither here nor there. It's just good to appreciate that it's possible. And then you go and listen to someone like Christopher Hogwood's recordings. I worked with him, and he wouldn't let me ornament if I was singing in unison with the violin line. He said, "You can't." And I disagree, but it was his concert. And then I worked with Alan Curtis when he was alive and his orchestra Il Complesso Barocco, and he would send you the ornaments before by email, PDF, and he'd write them all out. And that was actually the person who I learned the most from, because he wrote very good ornaments. And so I would pick up the style in which he wrote things. So if there was a an ascent, like say Vivi Tirano, and you have a line that the original melody goes and it's obviously a sequence harmonically going up. And actually, if you do a da capo and it's singing the same thing, it's quite boring. It's da 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 da, and then you start to say, okay, da 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 da, and you think, oh, I can do that and that, and then you can apply that to other arias which have a similar sequence. Because so many of these times, so much of the time, if there's not really a melody, the melody that's there is actually a device to move harmonically through. Whereas if you sing a really simply beautiful melody, the successful melodies that Handel wrote, for example, I don't know, like Where'er You Walk or something like that, something that is just a beautiful song, there won't be many spare notes that are just used to move you through the harmony. But often with coloratura arias and stuff like that, there's often you're just kind of like an instrument moving through. So that's where the opportunity is to kind of rewrite stuff without really ruining the tune, as it were, because there isn't really a tune. I would say listen, I mean, personally, right now, I would say listen to any recording you can get of the Italian contralto Sonia Prina singing. I think she's the best ornamentator. Ornament, is there a word for ornamenter? She's the best at ornaments, as far as I'm concerned. I've seen her, I sung with her, I've seen her sing, and she takes my breath away with the ease with which she sings stuff that I can't understand, especially when it's slow music. I think I don't know where, I can't remember what you sang, but whatever you sang sounded like you uttered it rather than it was a written aria. It believable, and it's a really difficult thing to explain, but it's something to do with the way she didn't just write different melodies, but she actually did stuff with the rhythm. So Dove Sei from Rodlinda, the opening aria, I saw her singing it and she just did the most amazing little turns uh, in the simplest melody. And that was the great thing. Very simple melody that doesn't need much ornamentation. But one of the things she did, which I've copied and I just steal myself, is she would anticipate phrases that, so you have the rhythm, uh, dove sei amato bene, vieni l'alma a consolar, and then vieni, vieni, da da, and it's always da da, da da, and she do the vieni, vieni, dum, and on the offbeat, stuff that isn't particularly what a composer would write, but works because it sounds like a passionate expression, that kind of anticipating by singing on the offbeat and then lengthening the note. It plays into the effect of that aria in the first place, which is that there's a longing, there's an absence of a person. Cara Sposa as well in Ronaldo has the same thing. You have a lot of dove sei, and if you then invert that and you put the note before the rest, you do the same effect. And it's slightly out of the 18th century. It's not quite it wouldn't be understood by Handel. I don't think he'd find it a bit strange. But I think it's as far as we can go without it sounding completely alien or sounding 20th century, 21st century. So that's what I learned from Sonia singing. And she'd worked with Alan Curtis a lot too. So you'll find what fits your voice, and you'll find a sort of a common ground. Learn, obviously, there's some rudimental things in the music grammatically, which you can't and can do. You can't have consecutives with the bass line, fourths and fifths and octaves. You have to be very careful of that. I had a good experience. I sang my debut at the Met in New York. I sang the role of Onulfo, and I was on show 6 or 7 of 7, and the contemporary British composer Thomas Adès, who's a friend of mine, was watching. He came to see the show, and he sat there and watched 3.5 hours of Handel, which ended at midnight. And it was Rene Fleming, Andres Scholl, Shen Yang, myself, Stephanie Blythe, Joe Kaiser. And he said one thing to me. He said, "Well done," but then he said, "You know, in in your third one of your arias, you did a consecutive fourth ornament, and that's he heard it as a composer. It was brilliant. But ultimately, I think the thing less is more. I think that's a very good bit of advice for young singers. Don't feel the pressure to rewrite history. Um, Focus on expression as your kind of raison d'etre of an ornament. And when you get to cadenzas, again, don't think of a cadenza as an opportunity to show off. Think of it sometimes as a way, it's a device for ending a piece. It's why Gluck got fed up with the way opera was going, was because it became a moment at which people just stopped and just sang a load of stuff. And it wasn't very true, it wasn't real. There was no verisimilitude in the story. And so he didn't allow these opportunities to happen. And the Reform opera took hold of this. And whilst that might have been something that happened, is it authentic to do that? I don't know. And it can be sort of interesting in some moments, but I think if you need a cadenza to show the audience what you're capable of, then I don't know what the rest of the opera's for. So cadenzas can be just points at which time slows down and then picks up, or time doesn't. We beat the audience expectation, beat the audience's expectation, and carry on through a cadential point. It's essentially a kind of climactic harmonic point, which the door opens again and we're back in the familiar territory. So less is more, I think, is a really good place to start. You will never be criticized by somebody, or rarely criticized, I think, if you don't do a lot of ornamentation. If anything, the criticism I read is this is too much ornamentation. It's because people feel uncomfortable when it goes too far from the natural order.
Iestyn Davies' artistry reminds us that ornamentation in Baroque music is not merely decoration, but a living, breathing expression of human emotion. His insights bridge centuries of tradition with the immediacy of today's stage, offering us a glimpse into the timeless beauty of ethereal expression. It is a pleasure to introduce Taylor Wilson, a voice lecturer whose expertise spans a wide range of vocal genres. In this documentary, she contributes her knowledge as a pedagogue, researcher, and singer, offering perspectives on how vocal technique and expressive choices may shape the listening experience. She also observes that composers themselves often held distinct preferences regarding ornamentation. In her discussion, she considers how various qualities of the human voice may shape the emotional impact of performance, and how voice pedagogy can support singers in developing versatility while remaining artistically authentic. Taylor's contribution enriches this exploration by highlighting the importance of pedagogy not only as a technical foundation, but also as a means of fostering artistic sensitivity, communication, and authenticity.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. So the students that come to learn with me, and music that I might have sung, would often be music by Bach, Handel, yes, but also Monteverdi. And so the varied approaches, ornamentation, melismas in these composers vastly differ. So I've tried to answer this. I will try to answer this in a way that might cover quite as I said, various ornamentation. So I feel there is a specificity in and around the Baroque era in general. It's more specific. It would be perhaps notated specifically, i.e. Bach might have notated it within the score that perhaps Handel didn't. And so there is more maybe structure and convention around Baroque style that might not be as prevalent in, say, pop genre, where the singer can either capitalize on their own unique voice. They can perhaps express the music and perhaps, this is up for discussion, express in a depth or a different quality of the voice that might not be convention of the classical singing voice, not Baroque. I'm not differentiating between classical and Baroque here, but saying classical music in general, adding perhaps more of a breathy tone that would not be appropriate to classical singing. So that for me, there could be a differentiation between the quality, between expression, and how one might technically approach it. Convention, perhaps more restriction, perhaps, but not always, because Handel, in Handel for me, there was an expression that one could bring out in his music. For example, in the Da Capo aria, that one might be able to have more free rein to express oneself than one might be able to do with Bach and perhaps Monteverdi.
She also described the challenges faced by singers from non-Baroque traditions when approaching melismas and extended ornamentation.
For me, if someone comes to sing Baroque music, there can be a question of the weighting of the voice, i.e., is it a heavier instrument? Is it a lighter instrument? And sometimes that can dictate what genre of music they may gravitate towards. Perhaps a bigger voice, perhaps. This is all up for discussion. I'll say this throughout. It's all about perspective and one's own experience and aesthetic bias. But if it's a bigger voice, sometimes they'll be more drawn towards the Romantic era and beyond, where they may not approach a Baroque era. So that, for me, a challenge could be, let's say the voice is bigger. They may find it hard to fit their size of instrument around Baroque vocal music. And if that's the case, I would have to work very hard with them on their technique to master and gain an agility to navigate the trills, the melismas, the ornamentation that one needs to have to successfully sing Baroque music. So there's an example, weighting of the voice, a weight of it. Also, if the voice has an obvious vibrato, this may get in the way of navigating again the ornamentation of Baroque music, where the vibrato and the trill are almost indistinguishable, and so it could be a question of the weight of the voice. If the voice has less vibrato, it can be easier when one's singing other genre to sing Baroque genre. Two things. In my humble opinion, if, say, Handel and Bach were living today and heard the voices that are more prevalent today, I just wonder, there was the harpsichord then, and now we have the piano and instruments in which one can get a dynamic differentiation that, say, that harpsichord did not have. I just wonder if they might say, yeah, let's have more the full voice, where you feel you're firing off all pistons. That's a voice that I want to hear as well. But they worked with what they had in those days and what was convention and expectation of sound. I think there'd be a broader acceptance on what voices can sing Baroque. And the other thing I wanted to say, for me, a good technique is one in which, when I'm practicing, I think like an athlete, say a basketball player, to be at the top of their game, they need to practice other sports. So they're working different muscle sets so that they can play tennis and play other, so that basketball, they don't just have one muscle set physically. in which play basketball, they need to work all the muscles. And so I advocate as a teacher and as a singer, I will sing different genre and style so that I am, what's the word? I can't find it. So that the muscles can do, any style and have a flexibility. I think that's super important. That's what I wanted to add.
In reflecting on the possibility of teaching ethereality directly, Ms. Wilson considered whether this quality is trainable or largely innate.
So, there are voices with whom I work, we work together, who have a natural sound or a sound that gravitates towards a certain quality, yeah? And I have a certain go-to sound, yeah? But that was before I then studied many more years of study into the anatomy and physiology and understood that the voice was so very capable of different qualities and sounds. It was about accessing it and understanding how the voice works. To realize that in a way I had limited myself to a certain sound or sounds, although the voice is versatile. And there's so much more, like an artist's palette, that we can blend colours and qualities that can heighten a sense of expression, ethereality, yes, and be so much more than the sum of our parts. So I think, in answer to your initial question, I think there is a natural vocal quality we have, but there's so much more through learning with an informed teacher who understands, a bit like opening the bonnet of a car. The engine can work in so many different ways, and it's understanding how we can work with that engine and can just bring so much more into our music making and artistic intention.
Her comments also address teaching methods that foster emotional transparency without sacrificing technical stability.
When we are approaching music, and this is an aspect we want to add into our vocalizing, this emotional aspect. For me, there's no one size fits all when I'm working with a student. And so if there is a student who, say, for example, doesn't have emotional connection with a song, I will approach that in a different way. I might say, well, let's look at the lyric. What are you singing about? And have them step back from the music itself and purely look at context, i.e. the lyric, and perhaps find a connection, first of all, with what they're singing about or to whom they are singing, and approach it that way. That might be one student in which to infuse their voices with meaning, with finding ornamentation with an emotion. And then, for example, I might then work with a student who's already got an emotional connection, or indeed that first student who has not got the emotional connection, but we find it through the lyric. What can happen is, if we overly connect, perhaps as an example, we connect with the lyric or the emotion through a personal experience, and then what can happen is, we become too emotional, we become too involved with our emotions, we lose sight of the importance of storytelling, letting the audience become moved by what you're doing, and that we're not being on stage and self-indulgent because we've so very much become overly involved perhaps with emotional connection, and therefore we lose stability. So there has to be a balance of connection with the lyric, but perhaps separating for me technical practice so that is technically, the song is technically well sung, then artistic intention, choice, emotion, and that the two synthesize so that we have that beautiful performance magic where the audience become moved, but we are not completely self-absorbed and become a puddle on a floor on stage. I think that's really important. Technical practice, artistic intention, then do that. Then for me, we can attain all of this. Ethereality, emotional intention, all of that can be achieved.
The role of the accompanist is central to shaping the expressive space for ornamentation. Pianist Romana Tivadar described how she perceives her role in this fragile dialogue, her views on collaboration and ornamentation.
Hello, I would like to answer some questions which Carlos sent over for his beautiful project about Baroque vocal music. So here are the answers. Question number 1. What draws you personally to Baroque vocal music, if at all? For me, beauty of Baroque music remains timeless. It shows the rich creativity of this period, and it contains a special kind of beauty, a kind of bizarreness, and a special kind of drama, and is one of the most important musical periods in history. I've always found Baroque music as extremely light, but also very expressive, with all heavily ornamented music, which is very demanding for the performer, as it requires perfect technique to be able to conjure up all the lightness and contradiction of the music. Vocal music played an important role in the Baroque period. Operatic arias, oratorios, and cantatas were popular forms of vocal expression, and all these Baroque masterpieces are still appreciated and performed today. Question number 2. Do you believe that vocal ornamentation in early music carries emotional power? Why or why not? Baroque is very known by its extreme expressiveness, showing dramatic, exaggerated, deep emotional nuances, and especially the opposites, like love and hate, sadness and joy. So yes, I believe that vocal ornamentation indeed carry an emotional power with its ability to evoke intense emotions through dramatic and dynamic contrasts. It is a testament to the artist's mastery in manipulating light and shadow to create a sense of theatricality. Question number 3. How would you define an ethereal performance? For me, the ethereal performance is the one which gives you the feeling of lightness, which can evoke the feeling of happiness or sometimes the feeling of tranquility that may feel too beautiful to even breathe, feeling like you will ascend inside of you. Generally, I would say that lively melodies, intricate ornamentation, and vibrant rhythms can evoke happiness, elation, and uplifting mood. I read somewhere once that Baroque music, with its steady tempo in the 50 to 70 or 60 to 75 beats per minute range, parallels the brain's wavelengths when the brain is in the state of relaxed alertness, which is alpha brain wave pattern. I cannot answer the question number 4, as I'm not trainee for vocal music. So I will just continue with question number 5. Do you think all listeners can access the emotional nuance of Baroque singing? Why or why not? I think this question is more subjective, as it seems at the first glance. As everything else, Baroque music can be a bit too much for the listeners, and the reason lies in the very primal characteristics of the Baroque music. What seems to be ethereal feeling for someone can be too exaggerating and over the top for someone else. So I think that association between music features and emotion differ among individuals. So here are the answers. I hope I answer all of them.
Halil Karakeçili, a classical singing student, described the technical demands of ornamentation from his perspective.
Hello, I am Halil Karakeçili. I'm from Turkey. I live in Istanbul. I am studying music at the university. I like singing opera a lot. And now I am going to answer the questions which are sent to me by Carlo Orlandi. Fourth question, can you describe a moment in your career or training where vocal color or melisma moved you emotionally? I felt my initial profound emotional bond with Baroque music by singing Handel's Messiah aria, Every Valley Shall Be Exalted. It's very good aria. Since I am a tenor, I was given this piece and initially it appeared to be technically difficult. However, while I was singing it, I understood that the Melisma expressed the imagery with deep feeling. It was extremely emotional and left a deep impression on me. Second question. Do you believe that vocal ornamentation in early music carries emotional power? Why or why not? Definitely, as music from the early era, the Renaissance, was more reflective and ethereal. Because of this, music tended to steer clear of ostentation and adornment. For this reason, I think it has a strong emotional impact. John Dolan is a good example. I strongly recommend you to listen John Dolan's compositions. First question: what draws you personally to Baroque vocal music, if at all? Listening to and singing Baroque music is a great way to develop your voice. The Baroque era is where the bel canto technique in particular got its start. It also helps keep the voice healthy and keep it from becoming stiff. Our current harmonic system is derived from the Baroque era. For this reason, Baroque music is crucial to grow. I adore and listen to Baroque music because of this. Third question: how would you define an ethereal performance? An ethereal performance is one that lacks ostentation and decoration and has an other word, simpler and more straightforward feel. Because God is not superior to man, more solemn works were written. Every sound is understated yet striking, nearly imperceptible. The composition's sound appear to float in midair. It has a calm, lowly, and comfortable vibe. Fifth question: do you think all listeners can access the emotional nuance of Baroque singing? Why or why not? The audience needs to be intellectually equipped. Each Baroque artist hears a piece uniquely regarding ornamentation, and the audience should be able to identify and value this. The audience needs to be knowledgeable about instruments from the Baroque period. They should also be aware of the history of the Baroque era. For instance, they should examine the castrati since their existence and impact are genuinely intriguing.
Luis Manuel, a popular music singer from Venezuela, will share his opinion on the emotional nuances that these ornamentations may or may not evoke on some listeners.
I think all listeners can access the emotional nuances, even if not everyone does it in the same way. My experience shows that despite not having historical knowledge, I was able to feel clear emotions with every musical piece. So I think that the ability to access those nuances depends more on a personal connection and the listener's willingness than on their technical knowledge.
I now welcome Angeles Llanes, a psychologist from Spain who is also a singer. In this documentary, she offers her unique personal and professional perspective on the psychological and emotional effects that ornamentations and melismas from Baroque vocal music may evoke in some listeners. Her contribution focuses on how certain sounds from the human voice can trigger interesting emotional responses, even when the language of the piece is unfamiliar, or when the listener does not share the cultural or historical background of the music. This highlights the capacity of the human voice to transcend words, to bridge personal and collective experiences, and to establish an emotional connection that is both immediate and deeply human.
Hello everyone, I am Angeles Llanes from Spain. Usually the people is thinking that the music is like an entertainment or is like a good form for pass the moment in parties or when someone is studying or together a friend. And it's true, but it's not normal think in the music like something complex or full of information that is going into the brain and at the same time can enter our emotions. But it's possible. And maybe this opinion can sound ridiculous, but it's a reality. Because when we are listening a singer doing a high note, it's secure that our arms' hairs will be raised. Or we will be remembering any moment of the life if the lyric is about a good or bad experience. Do you know? In the same sense, it's incredible that the expression in singer face is matter, because if the face has not a movement or I didn't look to him or her, maybe my perception will be different. And if I can't understand the lyric because I don't speak Italian language, for example, I can feel the emotion between the singer from the music techniques. In resume, the music is not only an expression form, and is in reality a set of parts, lyric, interpretation, language, instrument, techniques. But sometimes it's more important the feeling put by the artist in the interpretation of the song, whichever be the song. The public will be or not conscious of the history of the area or the scene in the video of the favorite singer, but in the same time, the person can feel much and the connection with a voice. The artist needs to do a very good visual and auditory performance. So, the story can be understood and not be a false version of the protagonist or villain due to a poorly told story.
Alongside the expert interviews, I also carried out listening tests with different groups of people. My aim was to explore how listeners perceive the emotional power of Baroque vocal ornamentation, especially the quality I call ethereality. All of the detailed materials, as well as the complete interview segments, are included in the appendices of this project. In these tests, I asked participants to listen to selected Baroque arias and then answer a set of questions. They described the emotions they felt, gave their views on the use of melismas and ornamentation, and rated the level of ethereality on a scale from 1 to 10. To help them express their feelings with precision, I gave them the circumplex model of emotions as a guide. The full set of questions and the scale can be found in the study paperwork in the appendices. Test participants came from different backgrounds. Some were singers or instrumentalists with practical training, while others had musical experience but were not specialists in classical vocal technique. This gave me a useful comparison between listeners with technical knowledge of the voice and listeners whose impressions were shaped more by general musicality. The responses showed a wide variety of emotions. Participants mentioned feelings of excitement, tension, nervousness and surprise, but also calmness, serenity, happiness, and even sadness or fatigue. These emotions were not random. They were linked to specific moments in the music and to the way ornamentation was performed. The results confirmed that the test encouraged people to think about emotions in a detailed way, rather than simply saying whether they liked the music or not. Many participants highlighted the ornamentation itself as the main source of emotion. They said that melismas and vocal nuances made the singer's intention clear. Sometimes these nuances softened the sound to express tenderness. At other times, they added strength and drama. One participant explained that the typical period sound of Baroque music depends on the conscious use of these nuances. Another pointed out that even when the words are not understood, the voice alone, through technique, articulation, and color, can still communicate emotions. Some listeners described feeling deeply immersed. One person wrote that it was as if the singer was addressing them personally, almost with love, and that this created a strong sense of being carried into the sound world, away from ordinary distractions. This suggests that the combination of timbre, agility, and stylistic color in Baroque singing can hold the listener's full attention, even for those who are not specialists. 2 participants gave the highest possible score for ethereality on the 10-point scale. They explained that they felt a powerful sense of emotional transmission, and that good technique seemed to brighten the voice, making it more moving. None of the responses in this study rejected or contradicted the idea of ethereality. Another interesting result was the effect of visual information. Some participants found it easier to understand the emotions when they could also see the singer. They noted that facial expressions and acting added meaning, especially when they did not understand the language. This is important for performance today because it shows how audiovisual presentations can make Baroque music more accessible to wider audiences. Finally, when I asked about historical conviction and emotional impact, many participants said the performances felt persuasive and authentic. They linked this persuasiveness not only to style, but also to the way technique and intention work together. In other words, listeners seemed to value authenticity when they sensed that technical choices were genuinely connected to expressive aims. In summary, these tests show 4 key things. First, listeners consistently associated Baroque vocal delivery with specific emotions across the full range of feelings. Second, they identified ornamentation, melismas, and vocal nuance as the main tools that create these emotions. Third, ethereality was strongly perceived and rated highly. And fourth, seeing the performance as well as hearing it made the emotional meaning clearer for many listeners. All of the raw responses and test materials are included in the appendices for full reference. Discussion 1. Can the teaching and performance of Baroque ornamentation be systematized to make its emotional power more accessible to modern audiences? The results of my listening tests suggest that Baroque ornamentation does indeed communicate emotional power in a consistent way. Participants, even those without technical training in singing, were able to describe the feelings evoked by melismas, vocal colors, and stylistic nuances. They consistently recognized ornamentation as the main factor that conveyed intention. This indicates that ornamentation is not simply decorative, but rather a structured language of expression. For teaching and performance, this is significant. If listeners with no specialized knowledge can perceive emotional cues so clearly, it becomes possible to systematize the teaching of ornamentation. A pedagogical framework could focus on helping singers understand how specific ornaments, such as prolonging a melisma, brightening the timbre, or softening a phrase, consistently elicit particular emotional responses. While the beauty of ornamentation lies partly in freedom and individuality, the evidence here supports the idea that its emotional functions can be explained, demonstrated, and taught in a systematic way. This makes the expressive power of ornamentation more accessible to contemporary audiences who may lack historical or linguistic context. 2. To what extent is the appreciation of ethereal ornamentation dependent on a listener's auditory sensitivity or musical background? The data show that both musically trained and non-specialist participants perceived ethereality strongly. 2 participants gave the maximum possible rating for ethereality, and others described feelings of immersion, transcendence, or personal connection to the music. Importantly, these responses were not limited to those with technical knowledge of voice production. This suggests that auditory sensitivity and training are not strict requirements for appreciating ethereality. The perception of brightness, color, and resonance appears to operate at a sensory level that all listeners can access. However, it is also clear that trained participants tended to articulate their impressions with more precise language, often linking expressivity to technique, articulation, or historical style. By contrast, general listeners described their experiences in more personal and emotional terms. Therefore, appreciation of ethereality is available to all, but musical background influences the vocabulary and framework through which it is described. This distinction highlights the universality of the phenomenon while also showing the value of musical training in analyzing it with nuance. 3. How do singers and vocal coaches perceive and describe the aesthetic impact of melisma and color in early areas? My interviews with professional singers and coaches support what the listening tests revealed. Experts consistently highlighted melisma and vocal color as the central means by which Baroque ornamentation conveys emotion. They pointed out that melismas can either intensify drama or create tenderness, depending on how they are executed. Color, likewise, was identified as a crucial quality, shaping whether the listener perceives intimacy, brilliance, or despair. The results from general audiences mirrored these views, even if expressed differently. Many listeners described melismas as moments where the singer's intention became audible, or where emotion was amplified. This parallel suggests that the aesthetic impact perceived by experts is also evident to lay audiences, confirming the strong communicative function of these ornaments. 4. What pedagogical approaches can best develop a singer's ability to convey emotion through Baroque vocal ornamentation? The findings point towards pedagogy that balances technical skill with expressive intention. Several participants noted that authenticity was perceived when technical execution and expressive purpose aligned. In practice, this means that singers should be trained not only in agility, resonance, and stylistic accuracy, but also in intentional use of these skills to produce a specific emotional effect. An effective pedagogical approach would therefore include 3 dimensions: technical mastery of ornaments, ensuring agility and control; stylistic awareness of historical practices, so ornaments remain within Baroque aesthetics; emotional mapping, where singers consciously explore the feelings their ornaments are likely to evoke, possibly using tools like the circumplex model of emotions as a training aid. Such pedagogy transforms ornamentation from a purely technical exercise into an intentional act of communication. It helps singers cultivate versatility while remaining artistically authentic, ensuring that their performances resonate both with specialists and with modern audiences unfamiliar with the tradition. The discussion of these 4 questions shows that my research findings align strongly with the idea that Baroque ornamentation is not an esoteric practice accessible only to experts. Rather, it communicates emotional meaning universally, though different listeners interpret it through different lenses. Teaching ornamentation with both technical precision and emotional clarity can therefore open its expressive power to contemporary audiences in a systematic and meaningful way. In this project, I set out to explore the emotional power of Baroque vocal ornamentation, with a particular focus on the quality I describe as ethereality. Through expert interviews and listening tests, I was able to analyze how both specialists and general listeners perceive melisma, vocal color, and nuance as vehicles of expression. The results demonstrate that ornamentation consistently communicates emotion. Participants, regardless of their musical background, identified melismas and vocal colors as the main elements shaping their emotional responses. They reported feelings ranging from serenity and intimacy to tension, excitement, and even transcendence. In several cases, they described being fully immersed, as though momentarily lifted out of ordinary reality by the voice. This suggests that the aesthetic effect of ornamentation is not restricted to trained ears but resonates universally. A central outcome of the study is the recognition that ethereality is both perceptible and meaningful. Listeners not only perceived it but often rated it very highly, even without understanding the language of the text or the historical context of the music. This supports the idea that Baroque ornamentation operates on a sensory and affective level that transcends cultural boundaries. At the same time, trained participants demonstrated a greater ability to explain their impressions in technical terms, linking their responses to resonance, articulation, and stylistic practice. This distinction highlights the shared accessibility of the experience, while acknowledging the analytical depth that expertise can provide. Another key finding is that ornamentation can be taught and performed systematically to enhance emotional communication. If general listeners already perceive ornamentation as expressive, then pedagogy can build on this by making singers aware of the emotional functions of their technical choices. Teaching frameworks that integrate technique, historical style, and emotional mapping could help performers use ornamentation as a deliberate means of communication, ensuring that their artistry remains both authentic and accessible to modern audiences. There are, of course, limitations to my research. The number of participants in the listening tests was modest, and while the findings are consistent, they cannot claim statistical generalization. The responses were shaped by the specific arias and singers chosen for the tests, and it is possible that different repertoire or performers might have produced different results. Furthermore, the strong role of visual cues in shaping emotional perception suggests that live or stage performance contexts could produce outcomes distinct from those observed in recorded materials. Nevertheless, these limitations also point towards future directions. Larger scale studies, including more diverse audiences and a broader range of repertoire, could strengthen the conclusions. It would also be valuable to test systematically how visual performance elements interact with vocal ornamentation in shaping emotional impact. In pedagogy, applying tools such as the circumplex model of emotions in training sessions could provide new ways of linking technique with expressive outcomes. In conclusion, this project shows that Baroque vocal ornamentation is not simply a historical technique, but a living medium of emotional expression. Its ability to convey ethereality and other affective states is accessible to all listeners, regardless of background. At the same time, it challenges singers and teachers to cultivate a balance between technique, style, and intention, so that ornamentation remains both authentic to its origins and emotionally powerful for modern audiences. My findings suggest that when singers understand ornamentation not only as a technical skill, but as a language of emotion, they can open a direct line of communication between the voice and the listener, one that transcends words, culture, and time. Thank you very much for watching.